pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with justice and justice.
How do we do the roll call? Mary Ann here.
Present.
Barbara's here. Michael's here. Brian's here. And Scott Sanford, and Joe, and Jack Leeson in attendance.
And
And
And that's,
Deb.
we have this on. Is this, yeah, okay, that's Deb Dutton online with Zoom. And I think you also have to vote to allow her to participate officially.
Bring your mic.
okay. We ready then? Approval of the minutes.
First, we have to vote that it's okay for her to.
Attending by Zoom.
Oh, we got to approval of the minutes.
No,
Well,
no, we're
hold it.
still approving her.
yeah, you're approving Deb Dutton to join via Zoom and participate in the meeting via Zoom.
I'll move that.
Second.
Okay.
Thanks.
And he
You moved
seconded
to,
it.
I second it.
and Mike, and
Yes.
Michael second.
Yeah.
Barbara voted.
When we-
Yeah.
And
Barbara
now-
Puffer
Yeah, now we're,
voted.
vote.
Michael Hauser seconded. Approval of the minutes.
we're still on her, right? We're still on Deb Dutton.
Yeah,
We move to let Deb Dutton
Pardon
into
me?
the
Oh.
meeting. I move to make Deb Dutton into the meeting. Anybody like to second
Second.
that? Thank you. Is that good enough?
well,
All in favor,
then you
say
just
aye.
have to vote, say
Oh,
all
we
in
gotta
favor,
go
say
round.
aye.
No, we could
please
just
aye.
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 When you say seeing no opposition, motion carries. Seeing no opposition, the motion carries to allow her via Zoom.
Thanks.
Where do we go next?
Now you can do the minutes.
No approval of the minutes.
Are we moving on? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, nobody here to do a public comments, right?
Well, you would need to ask for approval of the minutes.
I can't.
Ask for approval of the minutes. Approval of the minutes.
Oh, I thought, okay. Let's approval of the minutes. Who?
Yes. I second that or motion.
Barbara
Yeah,
and
nobody-
Michael's,
Yes.
yeah, okay, Michael seconded, okay.
It's a comedy show.
Okay, this is all new, so,
If you do one, I'll do the other.
okay.
Exactly.
Well, you would ask, does anyone have any changes, or are they approved
I
as
can't
written?
understand something.
You would ask, does anybody have any changes, or are they approved as
Oh, does
written?
anybody have any questions or exceptions to the minutes?
No.
None were noted, okay.
Then ask all those in favor, say.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Wow. And there's no people here, so there's no public comment. Items for discussion. The finance director report.
Good morning, everyone. Joe Onzik, Finance Director, Fort Myers Beach. Within my Finance Director's report, I just wanted to go through this as quickly as possible for you. You have the written copy in front of you. I wanted to give you an update on the status of the procurement of the new accounting system. I did reach out to Sanibel Island and to Bonita Springs, and I did learn that they use the same system that I had actually used in King County, and then actually our accounting manager also used it in the same position that she came from back in Illinois as well. So everyone is pleased with that system. I presented the list of the requirements that we reviewed at our last meeting to our Director of Compliance and Operations, Frankie Kropacek, who is also the procurement manager, and he is reaching out to that company as well as to a few others that we've heard from who have been soliciting our business, so that we can get some competitive quotes and comparisons of to be able to compare the systems and to see which would best meet our requirements. So he's in the process of doing that. The fiscal year 2023 audit is still on schedule to begin the audit field work sometime in April. We don't have an exact date yet, but that's coming up, and we've been working to prepare for that. Something that's been an ongoing project has been the review and the allocation of all of the emergency expenditures that we incurred during 2023 and since on into 2024, trying to link those to the FEMA reimbursable public works projects. One of the complications in this is that we're incurring expenditures faster than we're moving along with FEMA in identifying the projects and getting them in the pipeline and getting projects obligated. So we have the expenses incurred, but we don't have all the projects identified. We're getting closer. We have a list of 27 different projects, and Tidal Basin is helping us with the scope, and some of the work involved is FEMA coming out to do site inspections, and that is very tedious depending on what they're inspecting. It's very thorough, so I'm very impressed with how thorough everything is, but that is part of why this is taking so long. So we're moving along, and Tidal Basin meets with them. We have a FEMA representative who comes out weekly, sometimes twice a week, and he's very concerned and doing his best to help the town, and even in redoing things that as assessments are coming back from FEMA, we're noticing that things were missed in the original site inspection. So just for example, they came out a couple days ago to re-inspect the pool because so much was missed in their initial site inspection. So hopefully then their assessment and the reimbursement we'll get back will be much higher than the original amount that they proposed. Let's see. As of February 29th, we received $16 million of FEMA reimbursements and about $9.5 million of insurance proceeds since the hurricane. So that totals about $25.5 million. And we've had emergency expenditures of $24.8 million. So we're just barely keeping ahead in terms of reimbursement with our expenditures. So cash flow is very tight, and it's important to keep up on top of that. I provided with the same, it's basically the same list of available funding sources with a few updates to it. So we still have the $6.7 million capital improvement loan that was originally awarded from the bank for those three projects: Bayside Park, Bay Oaks Recreational Facility, and Times Square. And this was before the hurricane. So there is some work that can be done with those projects, but it's doubtful that they'll be in time before the loan expires May 1st. But there is maybe a small amount we can get reimbursement for. But then once the loan expires, the deadline passes, and we'll not be able to take advantage. Well, let me think. I'm trying to remember I think it was originally $10 million loan. So we've already used $3.3 million of it, but that was mostly prior to the hurricane. So it was some improvements that were done for Times Square, for the Bayside Park. That's actually what paid for Bayside Park the first time around. Okay. And then the Bay Oaks Recreational Facility, some improvements had already started there. We did receive $7.8 million. That's like a brand new award from the Federal Department of Emergency Management, and that is for the Turtle Safe Street Lighting Project. That this has been in the works for years, and that is the exact amount that FP&L will be charging us to install all of that lighting. And so we've given them their first installment also on February 29th. We did receive the $5 million 0% interest loan that was awarded by the Federal Department of Emergency Management, and that was received on February 28th. So we do have it in the bank now. We're just reaching out to them to get more specifics as to what is the process or the procedure for using those funds. But otherwise, the intention is to have those funds on hand so that we can use them towards these FEMA public works projects for those initial expenditures while we're waiting for reimbursement from FEMA. And when we are reimbursed from FEMA, the reimbursement is what will repay the loan, so we don't have to worry about any payment schedule. They'll be reimbursed when FEMA reimburses us. There is an $8 million loan, or not a loan, a grant from a state-funded grant for beach renourishment that we received the award, but not the actual funding, and that should be coming in any day now. There is an older grant that we received from the Federal Department of Environmental Protection, Florida Department of Environmental Protection. This is $1 million for the Bay Oaks Recreational Campus. It expires the end of this year, and it requires a $1 million match. And so just this last town council meeting, there was an approval to use $1 million of the ARPA funds for that match so that we can proceed in doing the development of the ball fields, the pickleball courts, tennis courts, basketball court, all of the outdoor recreational facilities that were originally planned can now move forward and hopefully be completed by the end of the year with that grant and with the ARPA funds. And then there's really no change that I'm aware of with anything regarding the stormwater project. We still have the $10 million grant, the $500,000 grant from FDEP, and then we have a smaller one that's related to for 536. That was for a very specific portion of the Tier 1 project. And we do have the $17.5 million still available in the state revolving loan program. And so all of that is what's available to be used towards the stormwater project. The $11.9 million bridge loan that we received last summer, the end of June, that was supposed to, originally was the concept was to be there for us to utilize due to our lost revenues. And so we anticipated that $3.5 million would be missing from our normal revenue stream in 2023. And so we budgeted to use $3.5 million of that loan in 2024. So the budget year 2024 has $3.5 million included in the budget, but there's been mixed feelings as to whether we should utilize that loan, so we're trying not to. So we haven't actually transferred anything out of that fund yet, and so far our revenues are on par with budget. But part of that is because we get most of our property tax revenue at the beginning of the year. And so we are doing okay so far. But as we progress into the year, we may start to see a decline in revenue, in which case then we would probably use some of the proceeds from that loan.
What's the origination of the loan? Who extended the loan?
This was from the state of Florida.
Okay.
And there is a 10% interest that it's 0% throughout the first year, and then at beginning July 1st, there's a 10% interest on any outstanding balance. So that's was one of the reasons why we were hesitant to use it. We wanted to make sure we could repay it. But since then, there has been legislation extending the loan for 10 years, but we have not yet received any official documentation to that effect. We're just aware of that legislation that was approved. And there's talk of it being forgiven completely. But again, we don't have any official documentation yet to that effect. And then the last thing I wanted to just talk about is the $3.6 million of ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan funding that the town received. And just to give you an idea of how it's been planned to use so far. So $826,000 of it was budgeted to be used to cover an increase in general fund expenses for 2024. We did that because theoretically, the bridge loan that we received was not intended to be used for increased expenditures, but rather lost revenues. So in order to fund the increase in expenditures, we were using the $826,000 of the ARPA funds. There was also $328,000 to be a match for an emergency grant, and I failed to make a note as to what that was for. I believe that has to do with, actually this would have to do with our portion of the expense to cover the emergency temporary town hall is what that would be. So that is what that $328,000 is intended to be used for this year. And then there's $165,000 to cover the town's portion for a beach renourishment grant that we received from Lee County. So that covers those portions of the ARPA funds. And now we just approved the $1 million to cover that match for the Bay Oaks Recreational Campus for the grant that we're receiving there. So that leaves $1.2 million that's available. And we have until the end of this calendar year to obligate the remainder of this. So this is where it's kind of up in the air depending on what projects will be determined that can be completed by the end of the year. And of course, according to town council's direction as these projects are identified, and it will depend on their approval to use the funding. But we have $1.2 million available at this point.
Nice, so we can use a grant to support another grant financially, in essence.
Yes. In this case, with the ARPA funds, we can do that. Utility billing, I just wanted to put that in there because we, as the finance department, we've been concerned about some things. What's been happening is there's a large accounts receivable balance that is growing. There's $561,000 of a balance that are significantly behind. And this is related to stormwater fees, to fees on property that maybe are abandoned, or we don't know the story behind all of them at this point. But that is what needs to be looked into, and we had a meeting with the utility director this week, and so he's working with the billing team to look into each of these balances to determine what the situation is. And per my suggestion, we're trying to then get a sense of how would you categorize the issues. Is it because the person is unreachable? Is it because they're refusing to pay? Is there some problem where they overcharge because of a water leak? So whatever the situation is, we want to separate them out and then deal with each one appropriately. And some of it may involve granting forgiveness, in which case we would probably bring that to the town council for that policy decision. So we may have to also consider that depending on the circumstances. There's also $20,000 of unapplied payments, which means it's money that was collected by the town, but it wasn't specifically to a specific balance that was due at the time. And so we're trying to identify what caused that and how that can be applied, and some of that may actually end up needing to be refunded to people if that's turns out to be the case. So there's a variety of issues that are all tangled in this, and a lot of it has to do with the hurricane and the impact of it, and I think people were hesitant to pursue anything until people had a chance to get their own lives back in order and to get a handle on things. But now we're starting to look into that.
Because we purchase our water from Lee County,
Yes, we do.
right? So I'm curious on the pre-hurricane to today, how did the metrics look on the water? Because I know that's a great revenue source for the town, right?
It is. I don't have that specific, but I can find that out for you and get
Thank you.
back to you on that. So comparison between how we're doing now basis pre-hurricane.
Yeah, because on the water, we buy it from Lee County as a town, and then we arbitrage it. So net, it's a big, at least historically, it was a big piece of our revenue.
So we're overpaying for water? Just kidding.
You're paying the right amount for the numbers
All
to
right,
make sense.
okay, all right.
Then on the next topic is something that I thought I should address with you because it's something that the town council just addressed in their last meeting, and I believe it touches on issues that an audit committee would be concerned about, and that's regarding this settlement with the contractor for a dispute over contractual issues. There are aspects of it that I don't feel comfortable talking about in public, but I think what I've tried to outline in here at least is based on fact. I mean, this was settled, legally settled, so there's nothing we can do to change anything. But I thought it might be helpful for you to understand what happened, and then hopefully the town can learn from this so that this isn't repeated going forward. So what happened was Veeder was awarded a contract way back in March of 2022 as an emergency response provider for hurricane cleanup, for potable water tank repairs, for seawall repairs, and the contract, they were selected as a contractor based on a contract they already had with Collier County, and so we piggybacked on that contract. So in other words, Collier County had already gone through the competitive bidding process to select them, and so they, as a result, then we also then selected them. In response to Hurricane Ian, then Veeder came in and they provided the emergency cleanup services to enable the town to access and shut off water mains. So that was the bulk of their work. Early on in October, so roughly a month after the actual hurricane, the contract was amended to include federal contract provisions that are required by FEMA. So in there was language related to the specific rates that they could charge for equipment. So during that period of time, starting from the hurricane, so that's September, October, November period, Veeder issued 10 invoices for work totaling $2.1 million. And that went from the period the end of September through December 4th. We, the town, paid 8 of those invoices in full. They were approved by the person in charge of, I think it was through utilities, although I'm not quite sure like what the position was, but the person in charge of that department approved the invoices for payment, so they were approved. There was work also performed on the North Tower, but it was work that was verbally authorized, and there was nothing in writing regarding that, and that was also by the utility director at that time. And then we were invoiced for $168,000 in March for that work. And then, if you follow along here, then we did pay those first 8 invoices totaling $1.7 million, but they were paid without having been actually thoroughly reviewed in any way, shape, or form. And so as Tidal Basin became involved in trying to gather documentation, assisting the town with gathering documentation for FEMA reimbursement, we started to realize we did not have sufficient documentation for all of those invoices. And so they began working with the finance department at that time to work with the contractor to obtain documentation. And Veeder was cooperative. I mean, it was a lot of going back and forth. And it ended up in 3 different iterations of invoices and adjustments to invoices. What would happen would be there were things like materials were invoiced, but there was no supporting documentation for the cost of those materials. So once we received that supporting documentation and compared it to the invoice, we could see discrepancies, and then we'd have to make adjustments. Or there were apparently, calculation errors on the invoices where equipment would be charged for so much per day times, for example, 5 days. But if you did the math, the total over to the right-hand column was actually for 7 days, not 5 days. So we had to go back and seek credits for that. So those are just some examples of what had happened, that these were things that could have been caught in a review, that could have been caught if we had received the supporting documentation at the time. But one of the things that we learned, so what happened was, once we had 2 more invoices that needed to be paid, and once the finance department became aware of all of these problems and the missing documentation, then I'm speaking on behalf of the finance department withheld payment on those last 2 invoices until we could get all of that squared away and get all the supporting documentation that was needed. And one of the critical pieces of supporting documentation is called what we refer to as 214s. They're the activity logs that FEMA requires to indicate, if there's personnel involved, who were the personnel, what did they do, what were their hours, and then if equipment was used, what equipment did they use. So these are log sheets that support the invoicing for those individual persons' time as well as the equipment that we're charged for. So Veeder was providing that for the first 8 invoices, but they stopped when it came to the last 2. And they were just insisting that they be paid. We were withholding payment, and then that's when it went to mediation. So what we learned from that is that we're not allowed, apparently, to withhold payment just because we don't have documentation, which is distressing to me, because how do you pay an invoice when you don't really have anything to substantiate what you're paying? So I don't quite understand that, but I think something needs to be added to the language of contracts in order to make sure that we can do that. So I think that's one of the things that we've learned from it. I tried to do kind of a summary of the types of problems we ran into in reviewing these, going back and reviewing all these invoices. So there were sales tax charged to us that we should not have been charged because we're tax exempt. So that was a small amount, $5.5 thousand. There were supplies. These were the errors in all the supplies that we were charged, the materials that we were charged of $154,000. There were equipment that really wasn't eligible for reimbursement according to FEMA standards. That was a small amount, $7.6 thousand. Payroll calculation errors. This is where they had dollar amounts listed, but if you did the math going across, that was $38,000 worth. Equipment. This is where the number of days times the rates did not equal the amounts they're charging us for. That was $98,000. They had duplicated the expense that was billed to us for the North Tower in a subsequent invoice. That was $141,000. There was markups of 20% that was not included in the contract. In their original contract with us, they had a 10% markup. Then when the contract was amended in October, there was no markup. but they continued to charge the 20%. So there was a dispute over that. And then there was a demobilization expense that did not have any supporting documentation. That was $65,000. So we could certainly pay that, but there was no documentation for it. They had the mobilization charge documented in the beginning, but they did not have anything to document the demobilization charge. So all of that added up to $590,000. As we were moving through the mediation, I mean, one of the things that we were really hoping we would receive would be those 214s that were missing, because there was $192,000 of payroll and equipment expenses on those last two invoices that we could be reimbursed for by FEMA if we'd only have those 214s, but that was not part of the agreement, so we will not be reimbursed for that. So the settlement was to pay them $225,000. And most of that then is not going to be reimbursed. A settlement itself cannot be reimbursed by FEMA funds or any grant funds. So we had to go to the town's general fund to fund this. But fortunately, or depending how you look at it, we did receive that large settlement about a month previous to that of $250,000 that we are then applying towards this payout of a settlement of $225,000. So we did have the funding, but it's just unfortunate because we could have used that, for other needs of the town.
So the 590 adjustments,
Yes.
is that was inside the 2.1 million that was billed, of part of the 10 invoices?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, just so everyone understands, there was a couple problems with this. Number one was the process. So we had a director giving okays to do work, and it should have come from the town manager. So that process has been rectified going forward. So we're not going to see that. The other big problem was the contract, and this is why we settled. The contract was very favorable to the contractor instead of being in the town's favor as far as attorney's fees. So we were exposed big time if we didn't settle and it went to trial. The town would have been on the hook for the attorney's fees. Now going forward, those contracts are being adjusted so that everything's in the town's favor. So, but the one problem is we asked staff what our exposure is on other contracts that may be out there, and they think they've dwindled it down to maybe one or two. So hopefully they can get those contracts renegotiated in our favor, so this won't happen again. But that's why we settled, and that's why the town council approved the settlement.
So the net payment then was the 1.7 plus the 225?
Yes.
Okay.
So maybe something that you add to those contracts is, if you know that you're going to be reimbursed by FEMA, you put a clause in there and say, if we can't get paid because of your errors, then we should be on the hook for it. Would that be the mechanism for?
That makes sense. So that's the story behind that settlement, and I just wanted to make sure that you understood it from your perspective. Okay, so then on in my report, I just wanted to mention, as you can see from the financial statements, I did develop a cash flow statement. It has been suggested at the previous meeting, so it's something that did not exist before, but we do have now. And so I created one for not only the period ending January 31st, but also then I thought it'd be interesting to see, what does it look like going back from the hurricane to this September 28th. But actually, I had to use the date of October 1st, just because of how things were recorded in the accounting system. But it's only a couple days difference. So I thought that was very enlightening. I could when we get to the financial statements, I could point that out to you. And then personnel update. Senior accountant position has been filled by Maria Green. We're very happy to have found Maria. She comes to us from the Housing Authority, from the city of Fort Myers. She's very well qualified. She served in a number of higher level accounting positions, including working for the U.S. Department of State. So she's got quite a bit of accounting and grant experience, and she's just the perfect person for what we're looking for. And her heart is really with Fort Myers Beach, and I mean, she's willing to do a long commute and to take the salary that we could only offer her, because she really cares about the town and wants to do what she can, her part, to help us. And the same is true for our grants and payroll coordinator position. It was a brand new position that was created. It's filled by Flor Lemmer, who was an internal person. Flor had previously worked in the finance department as a staff accountant. She moved over into public works to be an administrative assistant. So her experience there and how things work and her relationships with the town and with the employees is going to be very helpful now to come in back to the finance department to work in accounting and grants administration, because she'll be working with those department heads and people to pull in information that's needed for the grant reports. She also is going to be the payroll coordinator, so that that responsibility will shift from human resources to finance, and with Flor's familiarity with employees and actually working with them on assisting human resources in timesheet issues. It's a really good transition to have her already practical experience in that area move over into our department. And then capturing time for grant reimbursement purposes is also important, and so her familiarity with that and her responsibility for doing that will go hand in hand with grant reimbursement responsibilities. And I just wanted you to know that I did, after moving from Illinois, I finally got my Florida CPA license transferred here. So it's now official. That took longer than I thought it would take.
Congrats.
So otherwise then, I do have the full packet of financial statements for you. There's a lot here, so basically I just wanted to go over the format for you. So the first one, of course, is the balance sheet for the governmental funds. It's just through January 31st. So it would start from the beginning of the fiscal year, which is October 1st, through January 31st, so basically 4 months. And it's by fund. So you've got general fund, debt service fund. The emergency fund is where all of the emergency expenditures are going through, that where insurance and FEMA reimbursements are funding. The gas tax fund is literally that. It's the tax revenue that we receive, and then is paid out for road improvement and maintenance things. Beach access has to do with Tourism Development Council grant funding. We receive a grant each year, and that's used primarily for supporting and maintaining the beach accesses, and some of our parks are cultural areas like the Mound House. Newton Park, when that was in existence, it funded that as well. So, but that's what that fund is for. The building fund is really the capital fund. That's where we do all of the expenditures for capital improvement projects. I'm sorry, I'm not thinking clearly. The building fund is the building permit revenue fund. So that is where we have the bulk of that revenue coming in is for the permit revenue and related fines and fees, and the expenditures would have to do with maintaining that and compliance. The capital fund is where we do our capital expenditures, and similarly, the community enhancement projects, that's a special fund that I don't have a lot of knowledge of. I think it was maybe more significant in previous years, where a certain amount was set aside for specific projects that town council members wanted to see take place. And so that's that was put into a specific fund. But basically, it works together with the capital fund to accomplish all of our capital improvements. The bridge loan is that operating loan that we receive from the state to use to help offset revenue losses. The American Rescue Plan fund is just that. It's where we keep those funds. The full amount is currently sitting there since we have not yet transferred anything out. And then we have the impact fee funds, road impact and park impact fees. And that has to do when new developments come in. They pay a certain impact fee, and then that's used to pay for improvements related to support the additional population or usage that might come about as a result of those developments. The next page is the balance sheet for it's actually called the official title is Statement of Net Position for our proprietary funds, and those are the water and stormwater funds. So the similar format then follows through for the rest of the statements, where you first have the revenue and expenditures for the governmental funds. It's the same group of funds. It's several pages because it's all the detail. And forgive me if it's too much detail. I don't mean to overwhelm you, but I didn't know exactly what to do because I don't want to hide anything from you. I want you to be able to know that you can look at this and find the detail that you would like if you're interested in a specific line item. I don't have this broken down by department. I can do that. It would be a much lengthier report, but if you do think that that would be of use to you, I can certainly do that for you. But this at least gives you an idea of what all the types of expenditures there are and in what fund they occur. So then we have the same thing with the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net assets for the proprietary funds. So it's all the same line items, but it's just related to water and stormwater. So you'll see a lot of zeros there because not all the same line items pertain to these funds. Okay. And then if you move on to the statement of cash flows, this is also by fund. I did the best I could with the accounts that we have in place. I looked at Lee County's statement of cash flows. They might divide things up a little bit more specifically, but I wasn't able to do that because, for example, accounts receivable, we just have a general accounts receivable account, and it's not specific to certain types of receivables. We can maybe make that change in the future, but right now, in order to run a report, I just have to utilize that one. So, but it still tells a pretty good story. We're able to separate it out by operating activities, by financing activities, and financing activities would include grants and insurance proceeds that may be coming in. So that's, and any debt funding that could possibly come into play. And then investing activities includes investment in capital expenditures. So that, and then we have the similar one for water and stormwater. Then I have a comparison of revenue and expenditures for just the general fund, because that's really the critical one that most all of our expenditures are in. All of the other funds are self-balancing. Their expenditures related to those specific revenue streams, like, for example, beach access, it's the Tourism Development Council. So it's only those expenditures related to that are reimbursable by grants. So those are all self-funded by their own revenue sources. But the general fund, this is really the catch-all for everything else that is not necessarily funded by grants. We have, various revenues coming in, as you can see, with taxes, fees, but this tells you that what I tried to do, because if you take the annual budget and just compare it to the 4 months worth of expenses, it may tell you where you are in terms of the annual budget, but how are you tracking, at least so far in the year? I don't have a perfect way of doing this, so basically what I did was I took 4 months worth of the annual budget to compare against 4 months worth of the actual data. And so you can see that very first line item for ad valorem taxes, we're ahead by 1,040,000, but that's because we received most of the tax revenue in the beginning of the year. But it at least gives you an idea of where we stand. If you go down to the total revenue, you can see that we're about 1.1 or almost $1.2 million ahead of budget at this time, at this point in the year. And then if you follow along all the way down to the end, to the end of this budget versus actual report, you can see the expenses were also ahead by 1.4 million in terms of being better than, or I should say less than what was budgeted. So we're doing a good job of keeping expenses under control, and so altogether we're $2.6 million of a favorable variance. Then what I did in the next set of reports is I was trying to calculate how is revenue compare in terms of like trying to calculate lost revenue. The best way to do that with the information that exists is to compare like this year's revenue to the 2023 budget, because the 2023 budget was put together before the hurricane, and that was conservative, so that is what we expected to bring in if it was going to be a normal year without the hurricane, and as of 2023. So now if we compare that to what we actually brought in, again, I took a 4 months worth of it, and I'm comparing that to actual. If you compare the actual to that 4 months worth of the 2023 budget, you can see that we're within $42,000 of it, and so we're very close so far to not actually having lost revenue. But again, most of the positive variance has to do with the taxes coming in at the beginning of the year. And so as the year plays out, and we're also in the busy season right now with maybe more parking revenue coming in, so that's going to make things look better right now. So, but we'll keep an eye on it. I'll keep generating this report month on month so you can get an idea of it. And then the very last report I provided for you is the cash flow since the hurricane. And so I think this kind of gives you an idea of where the money was spent and where the revenues came in from. And you can see the bulk of the expenditures was in the emergency fund, of course, because that all has to do with a response to the hurricane. So,
Joe, just a quick question.
sure.
Back on the comparative financials, 23 to 24. But in 24, and I know because circumstances change, but we've got on the revenue side, starting with Ledger 38-122. So those 4 items are income issues for us now, didn't exist in pre-hurricane. Is that a correct statement?
I'm sorry, so what, I didn't quite
So if
follow
you go
where you
to
are.
the page 2
Yes.
of the general revenue,
Okay, yes.
the 4 months, right?
Yes.
So when we compare prior to Ian to post Ian, those transfers, which start with Ledger 38-122, are new for 24, wouldn't have existed prior because they were as a result of Ian. But I guess my real question is, so those are revenue items for the budget? I guess I'm struggling just a little bit with classification.
Well, yes, you're correct. I mean, that's why they're highlighted in yellow, because I wanted to make that the same so that the variance would be 0, because I did not want that to skew anything. So you're correct in pointing out that those are new, but I tried to to handle it in such a way that it didn't cause it to create a difference.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. And I'm sorry to overwhelm you with all of this data, but I'm
This is awesome.
certainly happy to go over anything in more detail with you one-on-one, or if you have specific questions, I can come back to the next meeting with it, or if you have any suggestions as to, what would make this easier to follow, or to understand, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, I've got one question under general fund statement, but the budget versus actual code enforcement fee. We got $250,000. Was that the majority of that from Terry? And then where does that go if we're going to apply it to Veeder?
Supplement.
That'll just be an expense
It was
then?
the supplement, right?
Yes, what will happen is that it'll be a transfer out of the same department that 200, well, there's 250 that came in. We're only going to use 225,000 of it. So there'll be a transfer out of that department to the emergency fund to help pay for that settlement, which is where all the other expenses are. So that it'll show up as a transfer expense.
Okay, thank you.
And then the very last page is the cash investment and loans. I just tried to put there for you, just so you can see where all of our cash is sitting, all the bank accounts it's sitting in, the interest rate that we're getting on them, just so it's visible to you. We do have a few certificates of deposit out there, very, very low interest rates that have been out there for a while. And we do have some investments in bonds with FMIT. And then I also wanted to include the loans that we have out there. So we've got that First Foundation Bank loan at 3.15%. The balance is 2.6 million. That has to do with that $6.7 million that I said was still available. This is the remaining balance of it because we have been paying down what was already borrowed. Every 6 months we have a payment against it, so that balance is coming down. But it's a fixed rate, a fixed payment that's been built into the budget, so that's already established and is part of the budget. And then we have all the stormwater improvements, and those loan payments are paid right out of the stormwater and water funds and are paid for by their revenue. And then we've got the $11.9 million operating bridge loan that's still sitting in the fund. We haven't quite used it yet, although we did officially plan to use it, but we haven't had to use it yet. And then we've got the $5 million 0% interest loan that we just received that will be repaid with FEMA reimbursements.
So Joe, for the, I guess the 5 loans in question,
Yes.
are those amortizing or are these interest only?
Well, it depends. The First Foundation Bank is amortizing, and we actually are paying monthly, but semi-annually it's $288,000 each every 6 months. The state revolving funds, they're amortizing, but I'm putting the payment amounts here, but actually last year and this year, those payments were suspended by the state because of the lost revenue in water and utilities. So we're not actually making those payments, but I didn't want to lose visibility of those because they're going to kick back in as soon as this year is over. The operating bridge loan, that 10%, that $9 million loan, we have to pay interest of 10%. I mean, if that's according to the one and only document we have so far, we don't have anything updated, even though legislation has been passed. 10% interest kicks in starting July 1st on any unpaid balance. And then the requirement to repay the principal balance is based on our ability to do so. So there's nothing preset, it's very vague. So we could, I guess, we just need to demonstrate that if we're not paying it back, why we're not paying it back. And then the $5 million, that will be repaid by FEMA reimbursement, so there's no set amortization schedule for that either.
Great, thank you.
Joe, excuse me, on these certificates of deposit with the very low interest rate, can't we cash those in, pay the penalty, and invest them and combine them all and put them in, get a bigger, better rate of return?
I'm
Three of these?
I'm sure we could. I haven't taken the time to look into that, but I mean, we can do much better than that, especially when you look at what we're getting just from our normal bank account at First Foundation Bank, 5.06%. We do better to just deposit it there than leave it where it is. So as they're maturing, we can certainly do that. We have that one coming up in April. I have to look into it a little more closely to understand, like, why was it even put there to begin with. But I'm fairly certain we can move it. I don't know of a reason why we can't. I just want to make sure there isn't a reason why we can't. So that, I think, covers the financial statements. Let's see on the agenda. The idea of a forensic audit keeps coming up, and I've not brought it to your attention yet. We've only met twice, because this is really something that's coming from town council, and I'm really not the spokesperson for town council, so I've been uncomfortable to present it myself. I wanted to put it on the agenda because I end up being asked about it in the town council meetings, and so I wanted to at least present it to you and tell you the little bit I know about it. Since I've started, which was March, a year ago, there's been concerns expressed and questions asked, should we do a forensic audit? What do you think about doing a forensic audit? Of course, I had no knowledge of what went on, and so I could not answer that initially. Since I've been there, since we've been through the audit of 2022, I've not seen anything that's been of concern. Of course, I'm not a forensic auditor, so maybe there's something I missed. Something that I could imagine as a possibility is that maybe somewhere, somehow, invoices have been submitted to the town for maybe work that was never really done. I could imagine that as a possibility, but each individual department head, signs off on their invoices that are flowing through as authorization that the service or these goods has been performed or these goods have been received. So we do have verification from, who are supposed to be the sources of watching over that, but whether something could have happened that we don't know about, that's always a possibility. I don't know how a forensic audit could uncover that, but, I'm certainly not opposed to it. I have no reason to be, 'cause I've not seen anything that would be of concern other than what I can imagine as maybe it happened. But I think also the concern has to do with the previous administration, and I think they're just looking to see if there was anything. I don't know that they have a specific knowledge of anything that actually happened, but if they're looking to go and look at the entire term of the previous administration, that would go back to April of 2017 all the way to the end of 2022. So that's about 5 years worth. And when this was brought up at the town council meeting, the town attorney, and I hesitate to speak for her, but to the best of my ability to remember what she said, she expressed that the statute of limitations was 2 years, so it couldn't go back that far. She said it was, or further than that, and expect to recoup anything. She also thought it was very difficult to prove fraud, so it could end up being very costly in terms of legal fees. And so in the end, would it really benefit the town financially to do this? I mean, that's the question that I thought maybe she was raising without really asking that question. That's what it made me think. And she did say it was like throwing good money after bad. And so, I mean, that I'm bringing this to you as like the context in which it was raised again at this last meeting. And I just wanted to bring it to you because I think there were also questions asked, well, what does the audit committee think of this? Well, what, have you discussed it with the audit committee? And so I wanted to bring this to you so that you have a chance to weigh in on it and express your views.
Yeah, I think basically they want to get your sage advice is if we should pursue this. I mean, there's always questions of valuations. I mean, we saw that this contract was not in our favor. So, you know, I guess what would be the purpose? Is it to find fraud? Is it to, hey, there's some problems here and we need best practices going forward. So I guess we have to ask ourselves, you know, what would the purpose be? Would it be to find fraudulent activity or missing invoices or what have you? Or would it be a learning experience so going forward we can get best practices? And then we have to also look at the cost of it. So we, as the town council, there's legal considerations, of course, but I mean, basically, do you guys think there's enough reason to do this, and what's the cost benefit of it? So just asking your guys' advice.
Yeah, I think there could be some benefit depending on scope, right? I mean, it sounds like now, and before we had a process for sign-off, I'd be curious how many of those people that were in those positions prior to Ian are still in those positions? Because my assumption is probably there's been a decent amount of change or turnover, right? Which complicates the process. But as, from a good governance standpoint, I mean, I don't know the process with forensic accountants. Can you have an interview, get a bid that defines scope, right? And then make a determination from there as far as a recommendation?
Yeah, I think they could. I think there's hourly billing, or they could do it as a project. Then you have to give them a scope of how deep you want them to go and how deep a dive you want. Is it just a gloss over looking at the checkbook, or is it a deep dive into looking at all the invoices and processes and all that? So I guess you might say, is there a way the audit committee could come up with a scope for the town council? Yes.
Are you asking me?
Yes.
I would alternative be to make sure that we have good internal controls set in place and to prove that those internal controls are working so that, you know, that it's kind of like a survey document thing. I know it doesn't apply here, but to, if you make sure that you have good procedures and following good internal controls, ensuring that everything's being done properly, that you wouldn't use those audits in the future, or at least you could audit to those controls so that everything's working properly.
It's a sage point.
Is that a normal practice when there's a regime change that towns go out and do a forensic audit? I don't know if that's normal practice or not. If
I
it's
have no
not,
idea. Then you throw the hurricane on top of it. I mean, I'm sure stuff was missed right after the hurricane. I mean, people do it. So is that the reason, or was it there was something else? I mean, that's a question the town councils. We're getting everyday people asking us if we're considering this. So you guys are the financial experts, and I think what your advice would be. And she had a great point. I mean, maybe we just have best practices, and I know Andy and Frankie are coming up with best practices, but maybe tell us what exactly those are instead of saying, hey, we're doing it right.
well, I would say the best practice is to keep a finance director on payroll.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't have one forever.
Yeah, there we go.
That's number one. Unless, then over time, if there was anything going on in the past, now we have a finance director, I think you would see something later on without going through I mean, if you want to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We got enough to do. I mean, doesn't FEMA audit everything?
Well, FEMA will be auditing, obviously, anything that they have anything to do with. So before they reimburse us for a penny, they're going through everything with a fine tooth comb. So it's yeah, I don't think that would be where the problem would be, but
Wow.
So, I guess so, just as a matter of clarification, when you mentioned that, you know, maybe some of these contracts weren't handled quite correctly or whatnot, I mean, do you have evidence more than a gut feel of some of that may have taken place?
That comes from the attorney.
Okay.
That's-
Okay.
You know, I'm not a contract expert, but, you know, basically, she said that those contracts were very favorable to the vendors and not to the town, especially on the back end exposure with exactly what happened with this customer. I mean,
Right.
but we could have been on the hook for a substantial amount of legal fees had we lost. So I know they're redoing the contracts to make it more favorable for the town.
Sure.
In the future. I know that's a fact. But
So I guess maybe the question then is, maybe there's nothing fraudulent here, but maybe more mismanagement historically? Or lack
that's
of,
a question I'm asking you
kind of
guys.
back to Debbie's comment about having, you know, controls in place, right?
So when we get a contract, does the vendor put the contract together and then we sign it, or do we put the contract together and then they sign it?
well, I mean, the little bit I know, like in the case of this Veeder thing, there might have been 3 or 4 other contracts. Veeder came when the contract was amended. They brought their own contract, and they used it for I think 3, possibly 4 other contractors, so that they could all have amend their contracts to include this this required FEMA language in them. So they brought the contract to the language, and from what I understand, and maybe there's more to it, it was just accepted and approved and used, and with their own language in it.
So Brian, what do you think my recommendation? I mean, the council's looking for some guidance,
Right.
As far as, you know, should we pursue this? Should we maybe put the focus on best practices? I'm just the liaison, so I want to get a feel for what you guys think. I'm not telling you one way or another what I think. I'm asking for your advice.
Well, maybe we ask our auditors that are doing the audit, the annual audit, and see if they feel like, I'm sorry.
But there's 2 different things. An audit is just everything's in its proper place. Forensic accounting is another animal.
Right.
Unless you're looking for something specific or have an idea. But I think with the hurricane, everything was up for grabs.
Right.
Yeah.
What about for lack of a better word or connotation, what about best practices as kind of plan A that would be helpful to everybody? And then maybe the second part of that is maybe have a conversation with a forensic accountant to say, hey, this is our circumstances. In your professional opinion, do you think we should go beyond a discussion here? And if they say, we don't think so, then we've done our job. We've raised the awareness. And, you know, the town can make their decision as a town council from there.
I like that.
I agree with the internal controls, best practices. Like, as you said, after the hurricane, it was just chaos. So, you know, going forward, we need to prove that everything's good.
What about Brian's suggestion that we maybe bring a forensic accountant in and just say, hey, this is what we're thinking of doing, what, you know, give us your thoughts?
Well, they're gonna wanna bill.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I'm saying, is can we have the
Yeah.
conversation without an engagement,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I know in, it's not the same, but in my line of business, most of our engagements start in some sort of an interview process, and then they make a selection, and then contracts and pricing of services are put on the table. So up until that point, you know, no one has exchanged any money. It's just exchange of information and thoughts.
Joe, two things that you said struck me. One was you deduced what the attorney was saying, and we might be throwing good money after bad. And as soon as you said that, it got me thinking about what are we really chasing. I agree with this best practices approach. And you also said, when you're explaining two things, I think, in here, this is what we've learned, and this is what we'll do going forward. So you're learning in every walk of life. We're going to learn and make mistakes, and people are very confident in your performance so far. And between you and the contracts people, it sounds like those are the only two big problems that maybe there are. Maybe there's no bad.
Yeah.
You know, there are mistakes that people make, and
I
those.
think, procedurally, there was some mistakes. I mean, letting somebody just without going to the town manager say, yeah, go do the work. And I realized there was a hurricane, so I'm not passing judgment, but there's got to be a best practice. Even
Yes.
if there is a hurricane, you got to have procedures in place where money's just not flying out the door and your exposures increase substantially.
And so Joe's already telling us he's doing these kind of things, and there are other people in this town hall who I don't know who probably can work with you on the biggest problem areas, which I'm still hearing are only finance and contracts. The bit where the most mistakes can happen.
Yes. I'm sorry if I'm thinking about everything you're saying. I guess I'm a little bit nervous that maybe you're putting too much confidence in me, only because I'm wondering if you think I have more control and authority than I really do. So, although I know how things should be done, and we try to tell everybody to do it that way, we don't have control over everybody. And so, are they really doing it? Or, you know, we're trying to pull documentation together to make sure that they provide whatever, you know, to document authorizations. But that's, I think, the challenge every organization has.
Right.
It's not, you don't have total control. And I think that's maybe the crux of it. So, and then how, if you don't have total control, what do you do to make sure you have as much control as possible? That you have the guardrails in place to make sure that nothing can get past that. Financially, I think it's pretty good, but it's just, I don't know contractually and how things are actually, it's like in the execution of work, in the selection of people, I don't know, you know, that's kind of outside my purview, so I can't like speak to that, and I think we're at risk there, because you don't know if the people are really doing what they need to be doing, if they're doing it the right way, if they're actually doing it. I think those are more risks there, and I think that was part of the problem that we came into. Things were not being done properly, and it's really a lot. Some of the responsibility falls on all of the managers to make sure that things are being properly done. And I think we have a pretty good team in place now. You know, they don't report to me, but from what I can see, everyone seems to be trying to do things the right way and are cooperating with us to the best of their ability. So
who actually distributes the money? So the utility person says, hey, pay this invoice. Who pays it? Do they ACH it out?
it comes through the finance department. So any outgoing disbursements actually come through the finance department. We have an accounts payable person, or, you know, a few people that handle it. So it does come through us, and we make sure that it's authorized properly before the payment goes out. But, you know, we're dependent upon that person who authorized it, that it is correct. So.
Marianne, what do you think?
I mean,
Put a cap on it? I don't know. Then it's an alert if you go over a certain dollar amount. I don't know how you do it, but the accountants would know that. The internal auditors would know that.
need two signatures or something
I don't
like
know.
a second
we,
approval or
if
something,
you're
I don't
talking
know.
about payments going out, I mean,
I'm trying to figure out where you think the fraud has happened, and
Oh.
I'm like, okay, well,
Sounds like somebody thinks it happened before.
right.
And,
Okay,
and that's
all right.
throwing the good money after bad because of statute of limitations, proving things. I'm sure we've lost some records in this whole process. That's kind of where I was going, throwing the good money after bad. We won't even, if we find any bad, which we might not ever find, we've wasted a lot of time that you folks, who are talented in each of your disciplines, can work together to be sure you have better practices in place.
I feel like you said, the public is asking, are we really doing this right?
Right. I mean, just not to belabor it from my standpoint, but I don't see a ton of time or expense involved in having a conversation with a forensic accountant, right? And then at least we can document in black and white, we had the conversation. It was their professional opinion that
Not needed.
for all the things you just mentioned and the attorney mentioned, there's nothing here, but we checked the box,
Yeah.
right?
And, just to provide some context that maybe you don't have, just to address something that was just mentioned, any expense like over $25,000 must be approved by the town council. So we have that. Any check that's written over $10,000 needs 2 signatures. So it'd be either the mayor and the town manager, or or there's, I think the vice mayor is another authorized signer. So, one or two of those 3 people have to sign off on the check, and they're provided with all the supporting documentation. So if they have a question, they can look at it as well. And we also have purchase orders that are signed off on that go along with the purchase. So there are other measures of control that we try to make sure that things are shored up as best as possible. It's not we just pay a bill when someone signs it. There's a little more to it than that, and I just want to make sure you know that we have that context as well.
Okay, sir, should I take Brian's are you guys comfortable with me going back to town council on Monday with Brian's recommendation that, we focus on best practices, but we still think we need to have a conversation with the forensic account to get their determination, and that way we've kind of checked all the, good, yes?
I don't know, if we have a conversation with the forensic, doctor, if they're gonna obviously say that we need their help.
Right.
Obviously, yes, here's all the great things to do. So I don't know if we necessarily want to do that. We make-
Again, this, I need,
He-
I just need
Yeah.
to know what to go back
Unless
to
there's
town
something
council.
that they really suspect on a, specific contract, I wouldn't,
Can we consult
it.
with our auditors?
that's what I said.
Yeah, okay, so
Yeah.
how about that? That may be the best, that, we should focus on best practices, and we're gonna consult with the auditors to see if there's some smoke.
Right.
Comfortable with that?
Sure.
Okay, thank you, that's the direction I will pass on to town council. That's perfect, and maybe you have that conversation with the auditors, and then you report back to our next meeting, and then we'll just move forward, because like you said, Barbara, we've got a lot of things to focus on and limited resources, so let's, have them keep doing what they're good at. So I would agree with that. But I think, Joe, you should maybe have the conversation with the auditors just to see if there's some smoke there, and then if there is, then we have that conversation. But I'll take it back to the town council that we should focus on best practices.
I'd be happy to have that conversation, but I think someone else should also participate, just so that there's no conflict of interest. I mean, if one of the audit committee members, or Scott, if you would also have maybe a conference call with them, or if they come out in person, just so that you can also hear the same things that I'm hearing.
Yeah, let me pass it by town council, I've only been on the job for a month, so let me see what the best practice is from a town's perspective, whether Andy needs to be there, somebody from the
or
audit
the
committee,
chairman.
somebody from the town council. Let me find out what that best practice would be. And keep, again, we want to be transparent, and do things right. So let me ask that question at the next town council meeting, and we'll go from there.
Joe, can I ask it? I think I know the answer to this, but all of those different checks and balances with all the different payments, are those written down? And do the new employees that might be involved all know this? Has enough, there's a lot of change here, and is there enough orientation or a handbook or something in writing that would explain those sorts of things? Like, you can't pay something unless you have these two signatures. All those things you were bringing up. Do you think that everybody's educated about those things now with the new staff?
I think so. I mean, the accounts payable department is probably the most stable. The same person is there since I started, so they certainly know all of those procedures. And the new people, well, and then the backup person has been here even longer. So, I mean, those procedures are pretty well established. As far as is it written down, I can't say that it's written down very well. I mean, that's one of the things that I think we need to do better with is develop our official written policies and procedures. Just haven't had time to address that yet, but that is something that can be improved upon. But they certainly know like the basics of what to do, and we are following that. We probably already touched on this, but there's the risks and costs related to legal fees from contracts and upcoming demolitions planned by the town. This was something that Jeff had asked me to put on the agenda. I did reach out to our attorneys and ask that question, like what is our risk related to the possible demolitions that we would be doing, but I haven't had a response yet, and I know that's something they're currently working on, and they're carefully working on the legal approach in order to minimize our risk. But at this point I don't really know what the financial risk would be yet, but it's something that I'm still pursuing. So that's all I have for you, unless you have more questions or.
We got a number, move on. Are there any member items and reports? None? Okay, now our next meeting.
Yes, I was asked, and I forgot to look on my calendar, but I was asked by the town clerk if we could make an effort to try to keep our meetings like on a regular schedule. So I believe they had been on the second Monday of the month previously. Is that a possibility to do that going forward so that we have like a regular meeting time set aside, or does anyone have a problem with that?
No, I'll just speak for me, as long as if we want to do something consistent like that and then lock down the dates, would be
Okay.
just, for what it's worth, personally best for me.
Okay. And then we can go ahead and put it on the calendar as a monthly meeting. Of course, they could be canceled or if need be rescheduled, but at least to have a starting point of a regular schedule.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Monday of the month.
That's great.
So April 8th.
And there's always Zoom.
I'm going to be out of town, but it'll be easy.
I would be here.
That's the way it always is.
This is an active, professionally active committee outside of audit. Nobody in the committee's ever been, right? Which is great, because it makes for a great dynamic. You know, we don't have, everybody coming from the same discipline or background or perspective, right?
And there's always Zoom. You don't want to Zoom in from Europe or wherever? The Bahamas? I don't know.
It's,
Oh, I think that's probably going to have to be mandatory for you, Michael.
thank you.
But we'll have to do it in the afternoon, not the morning.
Whatever works.
Well, would we have a quorum for the 8th then?
Like,
Okay.
I'm probably have to do it, I'm gonna be out of town. I can do it.
What about
soon.
Deb? Deb, okay.
Five-
Still looks like we at least have quorum.
Are we allowed to meet without you?
Yeah, yeah.
You can zoom in.
I can submit, sure. Yeah, I've got, we're going to Dallas for the eclipse, which is, I think,
Oh, cool.
oh, nice.
so, well, see grandkids too, that, yeah, it's gonna be really, it's total eclipse right over Dallas, so.
Wow.
it'll be fun.
So will Zoom work? Or we can't see you?
Good question. Yeah, the eclipse.
It'll be a blackout.
1:30 in the afternoon, so, yeah, I'll be able to get on in the morning, no problem.
Joe, thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
You know, having an opportunity over the years to sit through them of these, this is the best one I've experienced to date, so thank you. The information is complete and helpful, and really appreciate the dialogue as well.
Oh, well, thank you for the encouragement. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it if it's accomplishing what it needs to, so thank you.
So when do you think your software procurement will,
Well, I would think within this next month. I mean, Frankie was trying to get me information this week, and apparently he wasn't able to. But so I know he's actively working on it, and I think it'll be forthcoming.
so what's the software that you guys are all familiar with?
Well, I didn't know if I should mention it in public, so I
Oh,
was
okay.
hesitant to do that.
No worries.
I can offline maybe.
So I was just curious.
Before the bids.
Yeah.
And you'll take care of our names so we don't lose them, right?
Yes.
Thank you for
I'll
this.
collect your names and put it in our trusty little box.
Can we vote to adjourn? Who makes the motion?
I'll make the motion.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.